Okay, so Mike talks about some pretty innovative science, and we've come a long way since the early days, to say that, control. We went from a really bad situation and turned it around, and this is a really big story. Probably one of the biggest invasive species interventions in the world that was successful in the Great Lakes for sure. And so we have a lot to talk about and a lot to learn from. And I can't go into detail about all of the history today. Unfortunately, they didn't give me a full day with you guys. But I am going to go into, I want to touch today on the point that this is also a research project. It's an oral history, and we're preserving the stories of the people that lived through sea lamprey control firsthand. But it's also a research project based on social science that we can use to learn about, to inform the future of the program and learn about new invasive species cases in the Great Lakes. So, just briefly, I'm going to do a brief introduction and talk about the objectives of the research side of the oral history, the approach that I'm using, and some of the preliminary findings, and then I want to spend some time talking about some of the key themes that have emerged that relate to the success of this program, and how we're moving those findings into use already. So what are we doing with these deliverables, and what's the status of them for this project? So like I touched on when I first started, there's a lot we can learn about from the people who experience this firsthand, people who have this experiential knowledge. And there's a grounded way to analyze their stories and inform the future. So the research approach is based on a technique where you enter into a sort of a dialogue with the individual. It's a semi-structured interview. And you sit down and you sort of piece through why this whole thing, what it meant to them, why did they care? You know, in talking with them for a while, this sort of gets hashed out. But you can't bias some of these interviews. There's a science to this as well. You can't go in with this preconceived notion that you know what this meant to them, because you never will know that. So you have to really leave it open and let them tell you, which takes time. You have to build rapport with the individual. So it's an inductive technique, and you have to lay everything out and then start to build your hypotheses and themes from there after you get all the data collected. It's based on grounded theory, where basically, like I said, I collect all the data first, and then I go in and I have research questions that I want answered, but I don't have predetermined hypotheses yet. Lay everything out, in this case it's interviews and transcripts, and start to piece together what the major themes are from there. So the objectives of the study are to determine, one, of course, the key factors that led to the success of this sea lamprey control program in the Great Lakes. Determine to the extent to which this data can inform the future of the program. How can we learn from our history? Communicate the results, reach out to a broad audience. This includes policymakers. I will say right now that nothing perks ears up more than a story from a first-hand perspective. You can talk about the science and the numbers, but I've done this a lot, and I've seen a lot of bored audiences in some of my pheromone talks. Sometimes people are more lively, sometimes they're bored. You guys look good. But you know, the last few years I've been talking about these first-hand stories, and I've not seen anything like it. I mean, people really engage when you talk about a first-hand perspective. So, and then of course to preserve these stories and create this record so we can use it for generations. We'll have the official record. This is something that Mark spearheaded, and it's a really big deal to have. So, the approach: collect semi-structured interviews. I head out and take my camera with me and high-quality audio, and we sit down and we hash out all the stories, one-on-one usually. Now, the places that I've gone so far to physically sit with and collect stories from individuals are shown here. And then, of course, the blue squares represent the locations where the individuals work the most, where they're represented locations in the story, basically. They don't always live where they work, of course. You'll see I still have a few more spots that I would like to get to, though. This summer we have plans to head around the shore here, Manitoulin Island and Georgian Bay, and then I'd like to head up the North Shore a little bit more up here north of the Sioux. And there are some places that sea lamprey there aren't a lot of stories about sea lamprey. They've never been prominent there, and they haven't yet, knock on wood. There's not the right habitat there. The conditions just haven't been right over the years. So there aren't a lot of stories in some regions of the Great Lakes. I've collected 70 interviews so far, and this now actually equals well over 100 hours of high definition footage and a lot of transcripts, high quality audio. That should be updated to over about 105 or so. The average interview is about an hour and a half, and it takes about a half hour to an hour to get someone really talking. I have a camera in there and all this equipment, and I don't personally like to have a camera facing me when I'm talking, so it takes a while for them to forget about the camera and really start to say why this mattered to them. I transcribe all the interviews and code and analyze them, and I'll get into that a little bit more now. So for coding, this isn't for detailed reading, this is just a screenshot of the software I use. I can code with SAS or R, like I have with pheromone work in the past, but then I would have to write code to code, which it sounds like a disaster. So this is a menu-driven software called NV. And in the middle of the software shot here, the screenshot, I've got a transcript from a commercial fisherman. His name is Clarence Tuffy Cross. He was up in Alpena, Michigan when I interviewed him. And he's talking here, this is just a transcript, and I've highlighted a section of the actual transcript where he's talking about commercial fishing. And so off to the side, I'll create this theme called commercial fishing and physically highlight that text and drop it into a bin. And every time I do that, it registers it as being referenced from a news source. So the source, the number of sources, this would be an interview from Tuffy Cross. That'll be registered, and then the number of times I refer to it will all be registered, and that's tagged now with commercial fishing. That physical text is tagged with it, so it's coded. And this process allows me to do a lot of comparisons. I can actually do statistical comparisons between themes. The themes start to develop, as you can see. There's a ton of them here. Got closer to 500 of these now. So some of the themes that emerge then, when you start to analyze, it's kind of like a cycle. You don't just get a p-value and crank out an answer. It never really stops. You can keep learning from it and keep analyzing it and comparing different themes and seeing why they relate. Some of the more trendy ones that emerge from the success to the control program is that the sea lamprey was sort of this last straw for a fishery that was in pretty bad shape. So it was the sea lamprey, all the 8 U.S. states and the province of Ontario, and they all recognize that sea lamprey don't really care about borders, right? And if there's going to be anything done about sea lamprey, they're going to have to take action on this together. We know that it was tough to take action just on fisheries issues over the last 20, 30 years. Sea lamprey really was cooperation was forged on the slimy backs of sea lamprey. In a really weird way. There's this pioneering spirit, this grit that I feel like I need to mention. Back then, there were no sea lamprey experts in the Great Lakes Basin. There was nobody to refer to, and they had no idea if sea lamprey control would be possible, yet they kept a super high level of determination and just continued forward into unknown land. They had no idea that they could control them. And it just persisted throughout. They would work hard, and they put boots on the ground almost with like a military-like tactic to get this job done, specifically in figuring out the life history of the beast itself. I spent a considerable amount of time on investigating this, something that just doesn't happen as much today. There's this upwelling from the community level, this response from the commercial fishing industry, but other outdoors enthusiasts as well, and other aspects of the communities. They saw these ugly things in the flesh, and they took action against it. Sea lamprey are pretty sensational animals, and it's easy to get people on board with getting rid of them. The commercial fishing industry played a huge role, of course. Extent and allocation of resources, so the money and the amount of regulatory power all went into play to the success of the program, of course. Sea lamprey control, it was always paired with lake trout restoration. This is a really interesting one. Specifically, like in the news and media, you would always see sea lamprey need to be controlled to restore native lake trout. It was like the yin and yang sort of aspect of it. Very specific examples got ears to perk up. It allowed the issue to resonate through Congress more frequently. It was just easier to follow. Control sea lamprey, save lake trout. And they did talk about the fishery in general a lot of the time, but in most cases, it was all about lake trout. So the project, it kind of continues to produce data like I led into. We have documentaries in the works currently. And these are going really well. We're in the middle of writing the script, and we hope to have a teaser ready for you guys by the June annual meeting. And so we have a lot of official documentary, on-camera interviews, I guess is what the producer calls them. The official interviews have been done. We have a few more to do this summer before the June meeting. We're creating a web page, sort of a cousin web page to the GLFC website, where all the transcripts, the full transcripts, the documents I've scrounged up, I've got tens of hours of historic footage that's been digitized and well over 800 old photos that have now been saved. Anyone who brings out, it seems like almost everyone I go on interview brings out an old cardboard box of good old stuff that I immediately dig into and scan right on the spot. I carry a little magic wand with me. It's just a portable scanner, hand scanner, and I just swipe everything right in front of them, right in their house. And so a lot of that stuff is available. And I realized it sounded a little weird. You never know what they'll have. The other day I was down interviewing an old timer in Chicago named John Dubin. He's one of the founders of the Salmon Unlimited chapter in Illinois. And he said, you know what, I have this old footage. It's on a 16 millimeter reel. And I was giving a presentation back in '65 to a bunch of people out in front of the harbor here. And talking about the problems with alewives and some other things. And all of a sudden this old grungy brown trout started sort of drifting, half swimming into the harbor. And I looked, and there was a huge sea lamprey on its side. So in the middle of the presentation, while someone was filming, he just told somebody to grab a net, and they netted this thing and pulled it off. And then he ended up giving a presentation about how sea lamprey are just now getting under control. And he had the footage. And so it's incredible. You know, you never know when they filmed it all. They had this old dinky brown trout that they managed to catch, and you never know what someone's going to bring out, you know, that we can restore and have. Outreach materials, you can put these stories into your outreach materials, and anything when you go on a tour to do outreach, you can hand out pamphlets and information on history much more easily. It'll be accessible and get people excited. There's exciting news on the book front. I had some great meetings with an editor at the University of Michigan Press, and they got jacked up about the story, because I was jacked up. And they agreed, and I'm writing a book. It's in the works. So we have the book underway. They agreed to do a book deal on the sea lamprey story. Peer-reviewed articles, we have a few in the pot right now. I'm sure we'll have a few more as this continues to be analyzed and we continue to learn from it. And we have a study that's already sparked off of this research. It's a policy and governance study on aquatic invasive species in the Great Lakes. We're treating the sea lamprey story as a case study and comparing it to new cases. And we've assembled an advisory committee of aquatic invasive species coordinators throughout the Great Lakes Basin, and we're looking forward to getting this study underway. It's pretty much underway. We're getting ready to have our first advisory committee meeting pretty soon. And I'll be doing a similar research approach with this to compare different cases instead of different themes and figure out what we can use for sea lamprey and what we can't. I want to emphasize that obviously some of the ecological aspects of sea lamprey will be different than new invasive species cases. There's not a selective toxicant all the time out there for every animal. There's different weird things about the sea lamprey's life history that don't overlap. The amount of time invested in figuring that out is useful in any case. And a lot of the policy side of things with dealing with sea lamprey is also applicable in other cases. And then of course we have this record that you can refer to. So if you want to know what it meant to the individuals that were out in that first test to test selective toxicants back in '57 and what they thought about that, Or if you want to trace the evolution of PFM application from the early days of pickaxe and barrels up on the north shore of Lake Superior where there weren't any roads, all the way to partitioning pumps out of the old backup pickup truck, all the way up to the new age chemotherapy for the stream that you guys do today. It'll all be on the record, and you can refer to it. So with that, I'd like to just ask if there are any questions about this.